I do see military action as a real possibility. In fact, I believe that we should be expecting such action to happen. The steps that have been taken so far are preparatory, preliminary steps. There are various ways in which we need to bring pressure to bear on Pakistan. Military action is only one of them. We need to create a broader international consensus that India is entitled to act in self-defense in this manner. But the reason I say that I would expect that there will be military action is because the government, both in 2016, when across the LOC special forces actions were carried out, which were billed as a surgical strike, and then subsequently in 2019, when we carried out airstrikes on targets across the line of control. In both instances, the government, presented these actions as indicative of a new strategic posture, indeed of a new India itself. A lot of talking up of these actions was done both by the government as well as affiliated organizations. And I think now the threshold is pretty much of expectations, domestically especially, is set that there will be some military action. And I do not see how the government can walk away in the face of such a serious attack and not carry out actions at least at that level of threshold.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. After the Pahalgam terror attack, India and Pakistan have taken a range of measures against each other, but it's quite possible this is only the start. So today we ask, what do the steps they've taken amount to? Can India diplomatically isolate Pakistan? And if military action is the next stage, what would the likely outcome be? Finally, does all of this have internal repercussions we in India cannot afford to overlook? My guest is Professor of History and International Relations at Ashoka University and the author of War and Peace in Modern India, Srinath Raghavan. Professor Raghavan, let's start with what's considered the most significant step taken by India against Pakistan, placing the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance. How do you read this? Is it mainly a symbolic or, as some would say, a psychological gesture, or is it meaningful?
Well, the Indus Water Treaty has been in effect since 1960. It took almost a decade for the treaty to be negotiated. It was negotiated with the mediation of the World Bank. It has withstood several wars, conflicts, years of insurgency and terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir and in other parts of India. So for this treaty to be sort of placed in abeyance, it's not clear that India is abrogating the treaty. I think the use of the word abeyance is significant because it suggests that it could be brought back into life, as it were, at some point if conditions turn favorable. But nevertheless, it is a very significant thing because this is, if I'm not mistaken, the only treaty for sharing river waters in major Asian rivers among any countries in Asia. And this is, as I said, a treaty which has stood the test of time. And by putting it in abeyance, India is trying to convey a very strong intent of, sort of putting pressure on Pakistan and conveying its displeasure at Pakistan's behavior.
Now, presumably, India will now deny Pakistan hydrological data, which is often critical during the monsoons. But what it can't do is divert or stop the waters of the western rivers because we simply don't have the dams, reservoirs, and storage facilities, and it will take years to construct them. Am I right there?
You are right. I think there are things that India can do in the immediate run by saying that, the Indus Water Treaty is in abeyance. One, of course, is sharing of river water data. The other thing that they can do is prevent visits by, say, Pakistani hydrological engineers and experts to projects on the Indian side, which again they are entitled to sort of carry out under the provisions of the Indus Water Treaty. Those things can be sort of put on cold ice very quickly. But all the other things, whether it is building reservoirs, diverting the flow of rivers, all of that would require a very significant hydrological undertaking on the part of India. And it will take several years before any of this can be done, even if it were desirable to do it.
So when C.R. Patil, the Jal Shakti minister, said last night, and I'm quoting him, we will ensure that not even a drop of water from the Indus River goes to Pakistan, that will take years to achieve. It's not going to happen anywhere near the next year or two.
Well, in the first instance, I would say that those kinds of statements are aimed at domestic audiences, and we should read them accordingly. I do not think it is practically a feasible proposition for India to say that no water at all should go to Pakistan. And in any case, any such attempt will take a significant degree of infrastructural investment on the part of India. An entire hydrological strategy will have to be worked out before all of this can be put into effect. What the minister is saying, I think, is more for domestic consumption and as a statement of the government's intent rather than what they are capable of doing right now.
But you make a very good point. Not only will it take years to achieve this, but more importantly, stopping even a drop of water from the Indus going to Pakistan is close to impossible because the water is constantly flowing. You would need unlimited storage in India to turn a river into a permanent sea.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that we should remember is that, whatever the political divisions, the ecology of the subcontinent is got a certain kind of unity. Already we are facing various kinds of challenges because of the climate crisis and what it is going to do to waters of the subcontinent. And if at this point of time we imagine that we can purely because of strategic or political intent alter the course of major river systems at the snap of a finger, then perhaps we are being a little too hasty about what we want to do here.
Let me ask a wider question. As you know, India is proud of being the world's biggest democracy. It's committed to upholding global institutions and what is called the rules-based international order. The Indus Water Treaty was negotiated under the auspices of the World Bank. Is it good for our credibility to play around with the sanctity of the treaty when we didn't do this, even though we were at war with Pakistan in 1965, in 1971, in 1998? Wars are far more desperate situations than the one we face today. Yet today we're playing with the sanctity of the treaty. We didn't do that earlier. So does this play to our credibility?
Well, there are two things. One is that India has been unhappy with the way that the Indus Water Treaty has been working, at least for a decade now, particularly with respect to things that have happened in terms of Indian construction projects on the Indian side, run-of-the-river power generation projects. There have been sort of running problems with Pakistan about how to resolve them, etc., for the past decade or so. So the Indian government has been suggesting that the Indus Water Treaty perhaps need to be revisited. Certain kinds of provisions, especially for dispute resolution, need to be streamlined or tiered up in a certain way that allows for the treaty to work better. So clearly there is a degree of dissatisfaction with the treaty. There has always been a certain sort of section of the Indian strategic community which has always felt that the Indus Water Treaty is a kind of a weapon that India can wield against Pakistan. So the calls for the abrogation of the treaty or walking away from it are not particularly new in public discourse, but clearly this is the first time that a government has announced that the treaty is going to be put in abeyance. And I do agree with you. I think it will have reputational consequences for us, not just with respect to how we are seen as honoring our obligations by way of major international treaties, but I think we should bear in mind that we may be the upper riparian as far as Pakistan is concerned, but we are the middle riparian as far as China is concerned on the Brahmaputra. The Chinese have a range of particularly large projects that are going to be unrolled very soon, which we are very unhappy about. We already do not have even minimal river water data sharing happening with the Chinese on a regular basis. And now if we are going to walk away from these kinds of treaties, then please remember that other countries also have a vote in international politics. We are not the only actor here.
And I imagine what you have in mind is the Brahmaputra. The Chinese are planning to build the biggest dam known in history on their side of the Brahmaputra in Tibet. And we have serious reservations and concerns about that. We're setting a terrible precedent when we start threatening Pakistan, because as you pointed out, we are upper riparian vis-a-vis Pakistan, but we are lower riparian vis-a-vis China.
Yeah, actually middle riparian on the Brahmaputra. And we are also looking to build a very large hydroelectric sort of project in Arunachal Pradesh on the same river. And the absence of any coordination mechanisms is a major problem for us. And we realize this. So as I said, it will have knock-on consequences. We know that China and Pakistan already have a certain kind of a political relationship. The Chinese will not sort of, do anything just purely to please the Pakistanis. But if we walk away from established treaties in quite this manner, then I think others will respond in ways that they see fit, given consequences. Of course, we may be under the impression that the Chinese are already not cooperating, so what do we have to lose? But I think that would be short-sighted. Because as I said, the entire subcontinent is going to face the repercussions of the ongoing climate crisis, and we need to be able to have mechanisms to act on ecological issues together. And this will definitely set that endeavor back.
Now, in response, Pakistan has said it will exercise the right to hold all bilateral agreements with India, including but not limited to the Simla Agreement in abeyance. Would holding the Simla Agreement in abeyance worry us?
Well, I mean, again, it depends on what aspect of the Simla Agreement do we think we are concerned about, right? So when the Simla Agreement came into being soon after the 1971 war, the Indian negotiators at that point of time were principally concerned to ensure that Pakistan would agree to deal with all disputes between India and Pakistan bilaterally, right? That was one of the major sort of concerns of those who negotiated and drafted that treaty. And, so that was to prevent the so-called internationalization of problems like Jammu and Kashmir, which had been a drain on India's diplomatic and political resources for several decades preceding. Now, the other thing that the Simla Agreement did, which in our context assumes much greater salience, is the line of control. The line of control is an agreement, is a line that transformed the ceasefire line of 1949 in the context of what changes had happened after the 1971 war, and then it was subsequently sort of written into maps and agreed upon in the Suchet-Gad Agreement. Now, if you recall, Karan, in 1999 when the Kargil war happened, it was India which was very keen to brandish the Simla Agreement and the Suchet-Gad treaty in order to show that the line of control actually came out of a formal sovereign agreement between these two countries, and that Pakistan could not claim that there is no line of control in Kargil, etc. We even put up maps on television at that point of time. So the sanctity of the line of control, therefore, has, I believe, some degree of considerable importance to us. Again, we may be working under the assumption that the Pakistanis anyway do not respect the line of control. There is so much infiltration happening, there is so much cross-border violence, etc. But having the line as an agreed line is a very important thing. Now, if the Simla Agreement were indeed to become inoperative, which I do not think is necessarily the conclusion that we should draw immediately, but hypothetically assume that it does become inoperative and the Pakistanis say that we do not agree, then you have a situation where you have a line of control between India and Pakistan, which becomes a bit like the line of actual control between India and China, which is not an agreed line at all. And that has its own challenges. And this line is much more operationally active than the line of actual control with China.
The consequence that you're illustrating over there would deeply worry India.
I think our security planners should be bracing themselves for a much active line of control going forward. Again, let's just go back. Since 2004, the pattern of violence along the line of control has been one of a broadly downward curve. We have had a situation along the line of control for the last 20 years, which has been much more manageable for us. If we were to say that, the line of control doesn't have any sanctity and the Pakistanis will operate on that assumption, then both sides should brace for a much more active line of control of the kind that we saw in the pre-2004 period.
Now, we also have several confidence-building measures with Pakistan in areas such as missiles, maritime disasters, and even the nuclear field. If these were held in abeyance, is it the case that both sides would suffer equally, not India alone?
Well, with any of these things, I think both sides are bound to suffer equally. Even the Indus Water Treaty, as I said, it is not a cost-free sort of effort for us to walk out of the treaty and say that we are just going to, willfully divert rivers or create more storage facilities or not accept any kind of restraints on what kinds of projects we will plan, etc. So I think any of these things are bound to hurt both sides. And what we need to understand is what are the costs vis-à-vis the benefits that we expect to flow from these measures.
Now, the Foreign Secretary's briefing of the G20 ambassadors suggests that India is also seeking to isolate Pakistan. There's no doubt that we've got expressions of sympathy from all over the world, but in a very real sense, that was to be expected. Can we go that one step further and alter the way major countries hereafter view Pakistan?
Well, I think the fact that we have diplomatic support and sympathy, and not just the foreign secretary, but reportedly the prime minister himself has had several calls with heads of states and governments, all of which have gone quite well. I think the Indian government has, in these meetings, tried to convey the involvement of Pakistani elements of the state in carrying out this attack. And I think all of that prepares the ground for any next steps of responses that the Indian government will roll out. Is that going to result in a deeper change in the way that these governments deal with Pakistan? I do not think so. At the end of the day, this kind of behavior, which is state sponsorship of terrorism as an instrument of policy on the part of Pakistan, has been going on for several decades. The way that other countries will deal with Pakistan depends on what their broader interests are as far as that particular relationship is concerned. So I do not believe that a terrorist attack, however deplorable and heinous it is going to just switch off that relationship and put it onto some very different track. I think that would be an expectation too far.
Do we also need to fairly convincingly, if not conclusively, prove to the world that the Pakistani state is behind this? Do we need to make public evidence that we have which credibly links Pakistan or the Pakistani state or the ISI to Pahalgam? Pakistan, of course, firmly denies any linkage.
Yes, that is, the Pakistanis have officially denied any linkage, but going by the news reports that have appeared in Indian media, apparently the Indian security and intelligence agencies have information, particularly electronic signatures of communication, which link the terrorists who are carrying out these attacks in India to agencies in Pakistan. And locations have been specifically identified, 2 locations, I believe, at least as per one news report that I have seen. All of this suggests that yes, they do have things, but in the nature of intelligence is such that it will not be put out in public domain. You do not want to compromise your sources. People do not know how to sort of draw conclusions from intelligence reports, which always have a degree of kind of flux to them. So I think some of this information will definitely be shared with our closer partners in order to make the case that this is indeed something that the Pakistani state has backed. Because when the response comes, the Indians would want to make sure that they have adequate diplomatic cover.
Now, 2 key countries are America and China. We have far better relations with the USA than Pakistan, but Pakistan has far better relations with Beijing. Do you see either Xi Jinping or Donald Trump altering their policy to Islamabad as a result of Pahalgam?
As I said, I do not believe any of the great powers or even middle powers will change the nature of their relationships with Pakistan fundamentally. That is determined by what their broader geopolitical, economic, security interests are and how Pakistan fits into that particular calculus. So I do not believe that there is going to be any fundamental shift. But yes, I think the US, the administration currently in the United States will be supportive. You may recall that in 2019, when we carried out the airstrikes in retaliation to terrorist attacks in India, the administration was broadly supportive, though they did apparently intervene when the crisis escalated subsequently, or so then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed in his memoirs. As far as China is concerned, I think we should bear in mind that the Chinese are at least as much concerned about terrorism emanating from Islamist outfits in their own territory as any other country is. So I do not believe that the Chinese will, how do you put it? They would not understand what the nature of the problem that India is confronting. Of course, Pakistan is a very close ally, but once again, I see that my sense is that their involvement may come in at a later stage if the crisis seems to be continuing and escalating, rather than us assuming that they will come in. But at this point of time, I do not think the Chinese will tell India that it cannot take measures in order to safeguard itself from terrorism of this kind.
So, expectations which are being voiced in the Indian media that Pakistan will be isolated are somewhat exaggerated.
It has always been exaggerated because no country gets quite so isolated. The only question which we need to understand is not a permanent isolation or a pariah status of Pakistan, but whether we have the correct diplomatic supportive milieu in order to carry out any strategic actions that may be underway.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Now, after the Prime Minister's speech in Bihar day before yesterday, where he deliberately spoke for a while in English, promising to identify, track, and punish every terrorist and their backers and pursue them to the ends of the earth, threatening punishment which will be significant, stringent, and which terrorists have never even dreamt about, do you see some form of military action as a real possibility in the days or weeks to come?
I do see military action as a real possibility. In fact, I believe that we should be expecting such action to happen. The steps that have been taken so far are preparatory, preliminary steps. They are various ways in which we need to bring pressure to bear on Pakistan. Military action is only one of them. We need to create a broader international consensus that India is entitled to act in self-defense in this manner. But the reason I say that I would expect that there will be military action is because the government, both in 2016, when across the LOC special forces actions were carried out, which were billed as a surgical strike, and then subsequently in 2019, when we carried out airstrikes on targets across the line of control. In both instances, the government, presented these actions as indicative of a new strategic posture, indeed of a new India itself. A lot of, talking up of these actions was done both by the government as well as affiliated organizations. And I think now the threshold is pretty much of expectations, domestically especially, is set that there will be some military action. And I do not see how the government can walk away in the face of such a serious attack and not carry out actions at least at that level of threshold. And I'm pretty sure the Pakistanis are expecting that much and preparing themselves as well.
If India does take military action, Pakistan, of course, will undoubtedly retaliate. When that happened after Balakot in 2019, we ended up losing planes and one of our pilots was taken into Pakistani custody. Do we have the military capacity to get the better of Pakistan this time round?
Well, the fact is that Pakistan has significant military capacities. We have an overall military balance which is much more favorable to India. But in terms of the usable military balance in the particular context in which we are talking about, I think Pakistanis may not have the capacity to prevent us from doing things, but they certainly will have the capacity to respond. Again, I think your reference to Balakot is an interesting one. The Pakistanis announced about 24 hours earlier that they would respond, and that they would respond in broad daylight, which is exactly what they did, which I thought was quite audacious of them in order to carry out an attack like that, in order to convey to India that we will not kind of simply stand by and watch. And as you said, that particular action, even though we were bracing for some counteraction from Pakistan, still led to blue on blue. That only goes to show that the military force is not a scalpel. It is not a surgical tool, contrary to what we understand. It's like using a sledgehammer. I mean, things will go wrong. You should, going in expectation, which should be that escalation will happen. Because escalation is something that depends on what the other side does as well. It's not entirely a one-sided affair. This is not like Israel and Gaza. So let's temper our expectations, and I'm pretty sure our security and military planners know that anything that we do can invite a retaliation at a similar threshold of military force as what we use.
Let me, Professor Raghavan, ask you a broader question. At the moment, the Pakistan Army's reputation is at a particularly low ebb in their own country. It faces challenges from Afghanistan almost on a daily basis. There is an increased threat of problems with Iran, although that may have abated a bit somewhat. And there is the incidence of internal terrorism, for which the army is accused and made responsible for mishandling. In these circumstances, how much of a challenge does it pose to India if we initiate military action?
Well, I think the Pakistan army, as you rightly said, has been a bit on the ropes, on the back foot. They've had difficulty handling the politics, they've had difficulty handling security, they've had difficulty handling former allies like the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. And I think that was partly the reason why the army chief about a week or 10 days ago spoke up on Kashmir and invoked the old language of saying how Kashmir is the jugular vein of Pakistan, which is to say that it's central to Pakistan's existence, etc. I think all of that is simply a way of asserting that this issue is important and that the army is the only institution which is capable of safeguarding Pakistan's very existence. So in a context like this, I would say that the domestic political situation is such that were India to carry out a military sort of strike in retaliation to these terrorist attacks, it would be almost impossible for the Pakistan army not to respond in kind. They will have to take action, and we should expect that their own domestic political pressures will operate in a way that they will have to act and respond at least in kind.
Now, in the statement Islamabad issued 2 days ago, I believe it said Pakistan would respond to any attempt to stop and divert the flow of water with full force across the complete spectrum of national power. That was widely interpreted as a threat to use nuclear power if required. But is it a bluff or is it credible?
Well, I mean, I think when they said that, they would treat it in the first instance if India were to divert. And again, let's understand that the treaty is only in abeyance. And even if we were to walk away from the treaty, as we discussed earlier, to get to a point really feels the sort of pinch in terms of water and other things, were we to take such steps, it would still be some time away. So if Pakistan is saying that they will use everything and the nuclear option, etc., I do not think is particularly credible in this particular context. I do not believe that the Pakistanis can simply invoke that and expect India to bow down. They have always used, force across the spectrum, particularly below the conventional threshold. That has been their specialty for the last 30, 40 years, is to use unconventional terrorism, insurgency, etc. against India. So we should brace for some of that getting activated a lot more. But the nuclear dimension of it seems to me to be hyperbole, and I do not believe it's a very credible sort of proposition at this point.
Let me finally, Professor Raghavan, ask a very different sort of question. Is the government's attitude and response in danger of polarizing the country internally against Muslims, but perhaps more specifically and particularly against Kashmiris? Already in states like Uttarakhand and Punjab, Kashmiri students are being assaulted and mistreated. Already Omar Abdullah, the Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, has sent his ministers to various states to appeal directly to state governments to look after Kashmiris who are living there. So is there a danger that our hyped up tense atmosphere and the government's own rhetoric could actually polarize the situation internally against Muslims and against Kashmiris in particular?
Yeah. I mean, again, if you look at the Prime Minister's speech in Bihar, he was actually very clear that this is a kind of an attack in which the entire country is united in condemnation, that we stand together in sorrow, and that we will act as one country and so on, because he said so many people have come from different areas. But the problem is not about what the Prime Minister is saying, but as you said, about what are the kinds of things that are happening on the ground and what kind of a message that the government sends. And I very much hope that the government will act on what the Prime Minister says and convey to other state governments that they will have to take steps to make sure that Kashmiris are not targeted. Because at the end of the day, this is a conflict where we have seen Kashmiris, even in the last few days, coming out in very large numbers in opposition to the attacks that have happened. And to present the Kashmiris as somehow part of the problem rather than as part of the solution, and the people whom we really need to sort of keep with us would be a very serious political sort of misjudgment at this point of time. So I really hope that the government, and not just the Kashmir government, but the central government, sends out a very clear message that Kashmiris are people who cannot simply be targeted for being from a certain state of India.
But the truth is, as our own newspapers have pointed out, Kashmiri students in Uttarakhand have actually fled back to Kashmir. Some students actually arrived at Dehradun's Jolly Grant airport at 2 in the morning to seek shelter and to ensure that they survived and leave as early as they can. So that sense of fear has been driven into Kashmiris. Does that worry you?
Yeah, I think it is a problem because, as I said, in a strategic conflict like this, the most important thing is, our ability to win the hearts and minds of the Kashmiri people. And in this instance, it seems to me that the popular upsurge of sentiment in Kashmir is very much in opposition to what has happened. It is very important that we keep that mood and sentiment with us, which is that the Kashmiris feel that such acts of violence are not acceptable in Kashmir. And that when people from other parts of India are visiting Kashmir, that they are their guests, they cannot be kind of targeted. They are soft targets and that they cannot be targeted in this way. And I think that is a very important thing. And it has been good to see that messages come out so loud and clear from Kashmir. I think it's very important that India responds in kind.
Professor Raghavan, thank you for the time you've given me. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.